Continuing education knows that at the end of the day, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we really listen to their needs, and we can offer them flexible options both within continuing education and across the campus.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us in the 78th Annual Conference of World Affairs. My name is Soledad Diaz. I'm the CEO of the YWCA of Boulder County, and I will be serving as today's moderator. For recording purposes, today is Wednesday, April 15th of 2026. The panel time is 11:15 a.m. And we are here to talk about tradwives and the conservative movement. Before we get started, I would like to read the University of Colorado Boulder's land acknowledgement. Louder? Okay, I can bring this closer, I guess. There we go. Is that better? Okay, thank you. The University of Colorado Boulder, Colorado's flagship university, honors and recognizes the many contributions of indigenous people in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Ute, and many other Native American nations. Their forced removal from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado can never undo or rectify the devastation wrought to the indigenous people, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. We will do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, and faculty and their work, educating, conducting research, supporting student success, and integrating indigenous knowledge, consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with tribal nations to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support, and to recruit, retain, and graduate Native American students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful. Thank you again, and welcome to the Conference of World Affairs and today's discussion. Before we begin, I'm going to ask you to look at your cell phones, give them thanks, and invite them to take a nap. So we can do that by silencing our phones and put them away. There will be time for questions, and you can raise your hand. We have amazing student staff that is going to help us. They can bring the questions forward, so they will give you a little card. You write your question, and we will look at them. And lastly, I want to do a quick introduction. We have our speakers today, Hadar Harris. We're so glad to have her. She brings deeply thoughtful human rights lens to this conversation. I'm going to give them some time to introduce themselves. Cynthia James and Hadley Manning. So Hadley, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Good morning. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. Whew, maybe I am a trad wife. I'm not sure. We've been talking about this. You may have my bio somewhere, but you should know that my primary focus and interest right now is raising 4 young children in Denver, and I do some contract work, so maybe I'm representing a more traditional perspective on today's panel, and I wanted to start by saying it's not bad to be trad. But seriously, I also, one of the points I want to make to start is that you can't believe everything that you see on the internet. Not trad wife content, not girl boss content, not statistics from some shading polling data, which I'll talk about that later, and not even some headlines from the New York Times, and I'll talk about that too. One recent poll, quite shady in the how it was conducted, got a lot of attention, said 47% of Gen Z women want the trad wife path in life. Did any of you see this poll? Yeah. And I think so much of this conversation will come down to definitions, right? The sort of tagline for this panel was, how is growing conservatism shaping feminism among Gen Z women? So You got feminism and conservatism, any word that ends in ism, I think people have a lot of different definitions for. And tradwife is another thing that I'm not sure people have a very clear definition for. But in this specific poll, when they asked Gen Z women if they wanted to be tradwives, they defined that as having a husband and kids, and your husband is the primary breadwinner, not the sole breadwinner, but the primary breadwinner. So 47% of them said yes, but in the same poll, the same group of women, 86% of Gen Z women said they wanted to hold jobs. So it's not like there's this big movement towards not having a job. There were no questions about, do you believe that women and men should play traditional gender roles, or that women should submit to their husbands, or questions like that. So I'm just advocating for us taking polling data in context and looking how the questions are phrased. I think that most Gen Z women want what all of us want and what generations of women have wanted. They want to have it all, many of them. So I think that this tradwife discussion is just the latest reincarnation of the question of what it means to have it all, and whether that's possible for women or for men or for anyone. Is anybody here, would anybody be so bold as to raise their hand and say you kind of lean left politically? Anybody? Yeah, okay. It's good to be here at CWA. Listen, I've been here before. Y'all love me. Okay, so for anyone who's here on the left politically, I have to say that I don't think that Gen Z women should be among your worries. This group is consistently an outlier among all other groups when it comes to their positions on political issues. They're rabidly progressive, I would say, as a group, or on average. So the idea that all these young women want to become tradwives is a little suspect to me. I don't think that the tradwife trend is so much evidence of growing conservatism. I don't see a lot of evidence of growing conservatism, honestly. But I do think it may be a rejection of a lot of the pressures that women feel, a realistic turn on having it all, because women in my generation and in some generations preceding me have felt a lot of pressure to be the perfect mom and the perfect employee, and it's impossible to do that. But for many women who live in the real world and not in the corners of social media, internet, clickbait, it's not a black and white choice, right? But it's a spectrum of choices between being fully career-oriented or fully family-oriented. And I mentioned that I think I'm an example of that. I don't really identify with either the trad wife or the girl boss hashtags, but I'm just Hadley trying to do my best. In this life, there's no perfect world, and there's no situation where we don't have to make trade-offs. The having it all discussion, I think, is filled with false promises and bad assumptions. Hadar and I were discussing before the panel that a lot of people don't have the choices that I have been privileged to have. For many people who can't afford to keep a stay-at-home mom in the household, it's a foregone conclusion. They're going to work. They don't have the resources on one salary to raise their family. Now, for people like me, you can take a glass half empty view of I have to make choices, but the glass half full view is that I get to make choices, and I have a lot more and better choices than a lot of women in previous generations have had due to technology. I've worked from home for almost my entire career, and that's allowed me to be close with my children and breastfeed on demand and just have a really nice experience, although it's not been without its stressful moments, right? Feminism, which is another word used in the tagline for this panel, I believe should mean supporting women in their choices, even if those choices look more traditional. And I will concede that I think there are some ugly elements to the tradwife content online. A lot of it is fake. A lot of it's very curated. Some of it is rage bait that's intended to get people, especially people on the left, kind of riled up. But I think some of it is a reaction or a pendulum swing after a time when women faced a lot of pressure, not just to succeed academically or in the economy, but to be more like men, be sexually liberated like men, have conquest like men, go achieve, be in the C-suite like men, and at the same time also try to fit the family things into your life, and that's hard. That's not been an easy thing for many women to manage, and so I think there's some element of this that says, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to succumb to all those pressures. I'm going to just make some choices in life that will make my life not so high-paced or high-pressure. But I would not throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think there's some value to traditional gender roles, especially in family life, and many couples will embrace that, even to a small degree, especially when babies or young children are present in the home. And for many people, this isn't an ideological decision. It's just downstream from nature. Women bear children, women nurse babies, women nurture young children, and I see this as a strength and an opportunity and a gift and a blessing and not a weakness or a setback. But to support women, particularly those who do not have great options and who feel a lot of pressures and are constrained by their resources and maybe the lack of a supportive partner, we can do more, and we should do more. We should offer more flexible workplaces. We should offer better on-ramps and off-ramps into the labor force. And for young women in particular who haven't really set off on their marriage or family journeys yet, I think we should be honest about trade-offs in life and equip them to make good decisions with their own framework for what they want. So the truth is that many, many women desire marriage and family, even if they don't want to be trad wives. And this is where I'll throw one curveball into the conversation if I haven't thrown a couple already. But the flip side of the trad wife hashtag is the girl boss part of the culture war conversation. And I think girl boss is just the new term for career woman. And I have no doubt that many women are totally satisfied with their lives as single people without children. But there are some warning signs in our data, and right now there's another panel going on about population decline, so I'll touch on that. But many, many, many more young women today will end up single and childless compared to previous cohorts. And many of these women will end up single and childless unintentionally. It's not a desire that they have, but they want marriage, they want kids. It's just that finding the path to having a family of their own is much harder for many reasons today. That's an issue that I think we should be talking about, and that's one reason why I'm not a trad wife hater, because I think people of all political stripes and persuasion deserve our support in trying to achieve their goals professionally, but also personally in their personal lives, and maybe even more importantly in their personal lives. So I'm not that worried about trad wives, but I could be convinced otherwise, depending on how we define what tradwifery is and what my colleagues have to say. So thank you.
Thank you. I totally neglected to introduce properly Hadley because I thought you had that in your lines, and I didn't want to double share, but I'm going to jump here, and I'm going to share with you why Hadley is here with us today, which is a very important question. So Hadley brings a conservative policy perspective to this conversation, along with a strong background in economics, public policy, and media commentary, which we already witness, a lot of experience. She's an executive vice president of the Steamboat Institute, and her work gives her valuable lens on how conservatism, gender, and public life are being debated today. We're so grateful for your perspective or for joining us today. So our next panelist is Hadar Harris. She brings deeply thoughtful human rights lens to this conversation, grounded in years of work advancing justice, civil rights, gender equity in both national and international spaces. She's the founder and principal of Rights and Justice Consulting. And I am being told that you will become executive director of the Promise Institute for Human Rights at UCLA. So we're very grateful to have you and your perspective today.
I'm here to convince you. Okay, here we go. So let me just tell you, first of all, I'm so happy to be back at CWA. It's absolutely the highlight of my year. I see some familiar faces and really happy to be back here with you all. Let me also tell you that I looked at the panels I was going to speak on, and I saw this one, and I thought, they hate me. I was like, I don't get it. And then I got here, and every single conversation with students was about how excited they were for this panel today and how excited everybody was for this discussion. And I see lots of nodding in the back. So I'm going to confess to you that I have now screwed up my Instagram algorithm completely, okay? So I am not Gen Z. And, I've been paying attention to the trad wife thing, a little bit, but I only heard about Ballerina Farm the other day. And so let me ask you a question. How many of you, and this might, how many of you actually follow any of the trad wife influencers or trad wife groups? Just out of interest to see. So not some? Yeah, I think it's very compelling, right? It's like super interesting. I love to bake. I love to take care of my house. There's like interesting recipes and stuff to follow, and it's very compelling I don't have TikTok, but that's a different human rights issue, and we can talk about that later.
I'm with you.
You know,
With you.
yeah, exactly. We have a lot of things, yeah. Anyway, so like, let's talk a little bit about, I'm going to tell you what I learned about tradwifery and kind of how I understand it as a difference from stay-at-home moms, right? But with some similarities, right? So, you know, the idea that women have a specific role, right? And that role is kind of around caretaking for children, birthing children, taking care of the home, taking care of their family, including their husband, right? That's common between stay-at-home moms and trad wives. But where they differ and diverge, as far as I understand it, is in the idea of submitting to their husband, right? And trad wives commit to submitting to their husbands, whatever that means, and in whatever ways that manifests. So tradwifery has always persisted in conservative religious communities, right? In the Mormon community, in Orthodox Jewish communities, in evangelical communities. It goes back really, really far, right? And so this isn't something new, but Instagram is something new and TikTok is something new. And the moment that we're living in right now is also something new that brings all of this together. So the idea that the woman has a specific role framed as something that is equally important to men, but is different, is something that is very sort of attractive in this idea of tradwifery. But where the critique comes in a little bit is that it kind of leverages this incomplete promise of feminism, and it frames it as a response to burnout, of having it all, of being a girl boss, and of, you know, the feminist lies that have been served to generations of women. And I want to talk about that a little bit, because often the critique of tradwifery is that it's sexist and that it takes away the agency of women, or that it is a manifestation of, you know, kind of a reparative movement to get past the lies of feminism. And I don't think that any of that is actually 100% true. Feminism demanded not only the ability for women to work outside the home and have professions and be valued for that, but it really fundamentally is a movement for women to have agency. It's about women having control of their own money, right? What year did women be able to have credit cards in their own names and bank accounts in their own names without co-signers? 1974, not that long ago, certainly within my lifetime, although now I'm getting kind of old. When did women gain the right to have control over their own bodily autonomy in terms of reproduction? Not Roe versus Wade. Contraception wasn't even legal until 1965 under a Supreme Court decision called Griswold versus Connecticut. I need to prove that I'm going to be a law professor and whatever. So I just quote that a little bit. And then of course 1973 with abortion rights. And then control over their own decisions and opinions, right? Women did not get the vote. Some women did not get the vote in this country until 1920, right? And so it's really important to think about those structural pieces that enabled women to have that kind of agency and how this fits into this talk about tradwifery. But there are real gaps that so many of us feel and have experienced every day, that Gen Z is walking into, and that those of us who are older have experienced every day in every workplace or not workplace all the time. Because there's a certain image of feminism that really prioritized personal achievement, right? Being the girl boss. But it wasn't accompanied with systemic changes to support being the girl boss, right? So it didn't allow for there to be subsidized childcare. When I had my first child, I had to go back to work in 6 weeks. I had 6 weeks of paid maternity leave, and I was lucky that I had paid maternity leave. And it was 19 years ago, so it wasn't very long ago, right? And I had 6 weeks of maternity leave, and I was going to have an au pair come and stay with our family. We were fortunate that we had space for somebody to come. It was the most economic decision. But they could not stay with my child until the child was 3 months old, and I only had 6 weeks of maternity leave. And so what was I going to do for the other 6 weeks with my child? And I was very fortunate that I had an office across the street from the law school that I was working at, and I had amazing staff with me who set up a corner of my office and said, just bring Adam to work, and we will watch him when you have to go to a meeting. But I was very fortunate to have that. Most people don't, right? Hourly workers definitely don't have that option, and there isn't a kind of societal support for that. So feminism has not produced the supports that we need to actually support that vision of personal achievement by having systems in place to support it. No systems of support for childcare, limited paid maternity leave. There's this new concept of parental leave, but it hasn't taken hold in a lot of places and in a lot of communities. And we were just talking about the value of unpaid labor. The idea that if you stay at home and you try to go back into the workforce, you've just been seen as taking a vacation for 4 years. And the value of the work that you have done in organizing and being creative and being the manager of all of these small and large people, right, is not actually valued, quantified, or Social Security doesn't actually provide you with support for that time that you took out, right? So the systems have not caught up, and that is where there is a grave failure of feminism. Because while we have personal feminism, and we have maybe some degree of community feminism, we don't have systemic feminism that has really delivered for everybody. And so where we have that, it's sort of easy to talk about burnout, which is real, right? And rather than demanding more social supports, to instead do a 180 turn and dig into, trad wife culture. So it's also appealing because of the instability of our current world, right? The idea of a trad wife gives a clarity of purpose in a world where there's tremendous existential angst. I don't know if any of you have felt any existential angst lately, but I kind of feel it every day. It provides for an idea of physical safety in a world where women are abused, and we hear about that, and we don't hear about that, but we see that all the time. It provides an idea of family stability in a world of divorce. It has an assumption of financial stability by putting all of it into the husband's hands. He's going to provide, right? And there's like this interesting idea of going back to the land. You get to learn how to raise chickens and to grow vegetables and to sew, which that's why I will never be able to be a trad wife because I'm a terrible sewer, and make bread at a time of climate change when there's like a real actual danger, right? You need to know how to do some of this stuff. But the fact of its growing popularity is also a result, or perceived growing popularity, right? I don't know how many trad wives there really are. What I do know, though, is that there are huge swaths of people who are followers of this social media phenomenon all over the place. And it's the result of savvy business and also political and ideological agendas. So it's led by influencers that are creating expectations and this idealized view of idyllic trad wife life. We were talking about, you were talking about, like, there's no way that all of this is completely accurate, right? So Ballerina Farm, which is like the biggest site, I don't know if it's the biggest site, it's the one that I keep hearing about, is one big site where Hannah Neeleman and her husband Dan have 10.4 million Instagram followers and over 2.4 million TikTok followers. Nara Smith, who's another big person, has 4.8 million Instagram viewers and 10.5 TikTok followers. So that's not just a few people, that's a lot of people who are following it. And it provides entry points into this lifestyle that is also followed up by a different kind of political agenda. We'll talk about that in a second, but it also promotes kind of the Ballerina Farm brand of olive oil and the Ballerina Farm brand of bread making resources, right? So it's monetized in a variety of ways. And when you have 10 million followers on Instagram, you're making, some money from that as well. Huh? She's a girl boss. She is definitely a girl boss, in addition to being a trad wife. So all of this, is sort of this illusion that's created on social media, and we know that there are lots of different illusions in lots of different ways for lots of different people on lots of different, for lots of different reasons, not just trad wives, but so many, like the whole lifestyle of social media as a whole, right? What you post on Facebook, what I post on Facebook, right, doesn't always give you the full truth of what's happening behind the pictures. But the thing that concerns me, and the thing that really does keep me up at night a little bit, is that the vision of this and the ideology of this, there's a straight line to the alt-right and to MAGA conservative political agendas. And I don't mean conservative, I mean like conservative, like wild conservative, right? So the Trump administration has been really clear about, first of all, its preferencing of men and of white men and of white Christian nationalism. And what you see is that the Trump administration came in and very quickly has been clear about its targeting of groups that it sees as the other, and has weaponized the idea that the other is a threat to the hegemony and the power of white men. So that comes against the backdrop of more women going to college than men today, right? I don't know if that's true at CU Boulder, but it is in many other places. In 2025, almost 62% of college graduates and college degrees were awarded to women. Women are visible in the workplace, in leadership, in different places. I sat on the couch and watched the Artemis mission the other day when they went around the dark side of the moon. And I don't usually notice it, but there were so many women in mission control. It was super awesome, and it really struck me over the head. So it's also been clear, the Trump administration, in its desire to protect women, right? In an early set of executive orders, which I followed very, very carefully, right? They talk a lot about protecting women in orders that talk about radical gender ideology. They've got this laser focus against trans people and protecting the integrity of women as a whole.
So, Hadar?
Yeah, let me just finish one last thing, and then I'm going to go. So it's interesting because it's not only the protection through the demonization of other, it's not about their own accountability as well, though. So there's nothing about the Epstein files. There's nothing about Tony Gonzalez resigning until Eric Swalwell did, right? It's about the others. So I guess I want to just end on two things. One is that we should talk about the idea that tradwifery is really contingent on class and often is contingent on race. So I'll give you that segue.
Thank you so much.
And then the last piece that maybe we can come back to is how the trad wife sort of priorities are manifesting in policy directives that are being proposed and that are manifesting in our world right now. Sorry that was a little long. There was a lot of pressure to talk about this.
Thank you so much. Okay, we're going to move to Cynthia James now. Cynthia's work center on helping people lead and live with clarity, compassion, and courage. Cynthia is an emotional integration leadership coach, speaker, performing artist, and award-winning author, and she brings a perspective that is both grounded and deeply human. I'm really glad you're here to give us your sense on this phenomenon.
Thank you so much. This is my first time at this conference, and it's awesome. I'm so grateful and honored to be here. When I got the list of the panels that I was on, I was like, what is a trad wife? So I went online and I started looking. And I was so surprised that there's so many trad wife sites on TikTok. And I'm on TikTok because my grandson is, and that started me going down the rabbit hole. But I really had to think about this phenomenon, not just as a woman, but as a woman of color. You may not know this, but there is a group of black trad wives, which is astounding to me. Because for me, tradwifery is really, what says to me is like, what is your choice? Because your agency matters. It's like, I don't care if you're a man or a woman, there is a need, a human need to contribute. There is a need to be fulfilled and not diminished or demanded to be anything or anyone. So I grew up in the 50s, and there was Donna Reed, except she was not in the black community. I went to a school that was multicultural, and there were Caucasian students whose mothers were stay-at-home, who were committed to taking care of their children. It was part of their Christian tradition. I grew up as African Methodist Episcopal, and but there wasn't that choice. Because one of the things I don't think the tradwifery thing deals with is 40 to 50% of relationships end in divorce. What happens to you if you are dependent on another person for the money, the choices, decision, everything? What happens if that person decides they're done? What happens if that person decides they want someone else? Because back then, finances for women was a challenge. Credit cards for women was a challenge. Bank accounts were interesting for women. And it's like, okay, so if I give over my choices and I give it over to someone else, what happens to me if it ends? I mean, there were things that I saw online where women talked about those choices. I loved when Hadley and I were talking about the choices that she's make is that it is a risk, but you are trusting that the person that you have said yes to follow this path is 100% trustworthy and will take care of you and the family if anything happens. And by the way, if they do walk away and you have not been educated, if you have not had a career, and if you have been away for a while, what happens to you? My mother was like, get educated, find out how to make your own financial stability, and never trust that someone else is going to be your source. And so for me, it's like, if you want to make that choice, I think it's great. Everybody gets to make that kind of choice if they want to. But the thing about it is, for me, partnership is more important than hierarchy. It's really about, I've been with my husband for 31 years, and we have a partnership, and we don't always agree, but I have a voice. And I get to bring my intentionality and my power to the relationship. I don't think choice is prescribed. I think it's something that you choose at any given moment, how you want to respond. And by the way, I believe life has sessions. And you get to decide, I want to be a leader in this session. I want to be a stay-at-home mom in this session. I want to do both. And so for me, the concern is that there is this messaging that this is the way that women should be. The culture, from my perspective, is more empowered when women bring their voices, their gifts, their talents, and their power to the planet. So I realize that a lot of the tradwife things is around faith. Faith for me is extraordinarily important, but it does not preclude the fact that I came here to lead, and I came here to write, and I came here to speak, and I came here to stand in the power and the presence that I am. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Cynthia. We have a number of questions, and I think that this will lead us into the following topics of conversation. I'm going to kind of try to group them together. There's a common thread here. One question that I think we can answer briefly and then go through the other one, so I'm going to enunciate, is someone is asking if there has been any similar tradwife movements in countries that have stronger support system for women. So that's an excellent question that we might address as we engage in this conversation. And these three questions are somewhat related. So do you see the tradwife movement as a just movement driven by women, or this is also a consequence of young men struggling societally and kind of turning towards more conservative ideals? Same line of questioning, is this more of a trend to go into a modern conservatism movement pushing a sexist or misogynist agenda, urging women to submit to their husbands? So also kind of part of the conversation, right, that we're having. And then the term choice feminism, referring to modern offshoot of feminism, emphasizing, I think we touched a little bit on that, and this movement being a response to a feminist movement. So I guess my question would be for you, first, the political use or political approach, political taking of the topic and merging it into the political conversation, is that real? Or how is this movement actually a response in the search of identity? Is that what we're missing? Is that what women are looking for? Is identity and a culture that can sustain them? So I will, Hadley, if you have a take on those.
Sure. I mean, I think I would go to the word purpose more than identity, that people are looking for their purpose in modern society. And I agree so much with you, Cynthia, about the importance of faith and having a framework for what you value in life, and having something that points you towards those things. I do think that Gen Z, more so than other generations, has rejected some of the kind of staunch, maybe workaholic tendencies of previous generations. And so I think that this is part of that, just focusing more on the experience of life and the experience of living rather than achievements like purchasing a home, or, their definition of the American dream might look a little more flexible, a little more different. And so this may be part of that. Disagreements that lead people to different conclusions, and that shows up in our politics, and it shows up in the... We're our friends. Of course, it's civil, and I think it's good, and I really enjoyed hearing Hadar's perspective, because that got me thinking about where the root of this may be. And I think fundamentally, a lot of Americans have just different views on sex and gender, and what those things are, and how they manifest in the human experience, right? And so you guys may be familiar with like Christina Hoff Sommers and equity feminism and gender feminism and some of the things that she talked about. But I would say, men and women are equal, but they are different. And I would say they are not interchangeable. And because I believe that men and women are not interchangeable, that leads me to some other conclusions. It leads me to conclusions that, yes, there are some things, like I think men on average have more physical strength than women on average, and I think saying things like that should not be super controversial. But then it gets trickier, it gets thornier into sex differences in the male and female brain, and the way that we respond to relationships, and the way that we respond to social pressures, and the types of personality differences that might be more common among people who are male and female. And my hope would be is that we could recognize sex differences and say they're real and they're natural without treating anybody like the other, that we could recognize that both of these things have tremendous value, And that is why I would say I would describe myself as a complementarian. Anybody familiar with complementarianism? Okay, well, let's go into the faith discussion for just a minute, because I do think, as you mentioned, in faith communities, particularly more conservative ones, this idea of submitting to your husband just sounds radically in conflict with much of the sort of modern progressive American worldview. But to go upstream from that, you would recognize, if you were someone, I believe most people who believe in submission to the husband, is it's really the wife and the husband submitting to one another and submitting to God. And having that shared faith and that shared trust that they're going to head in the same direction together. So I don't think we can take one of those pieces out of context and say, we just want any old gal to submit to any old guy. You know, they've got to share a set of prior assumptions about how they want to arrange their lives in order for that to work. And I think in a pluralistic society like America, if some couples want to have a more patriarchal or he's the head of the household decision-making model, fine. I think that's good. As long as she's entering into it, you know, of her own will, with her own agency, and I know some people like that because I grew up and I am an evangelical Christian, so I don't hate on that model, and I think it's one that works for a lot of people, but it also takes as a basic assumption that men and women are different. And this has implications for conversations about the wage gap. It has implications about women in the workplace. It has implications about, and I don't think that we're going to solve this problem with more social supports, because someone in the audience asked about Sweden and Nordic countries. I don't think we're going to solve these problems this way, because a lot of people who have a child, a lot of women who have a child, if they have the choice to spend time with their child and to be in the home with their child, they would prefer that over a child care institution. Mm-hmm. Now, not everyone has that choice. Some people do, and some people want that choice. And so that's not gonna assuage all the concerns that young mothers with young children have.
Thank you. And Hadar, if you can, you alluded a little bit in your opening statement to this, but there is one question that says, what's next? How do we create a better society? And you touch on how this is shaping policy, and maybe not necessarily connected with the actual movement. So how do we get there?
So how do we get there? Let me get to that in a second. But where are some of the things that we have to be really aware of that keep me up a little bit at night? Look, so much of this is shaped by this image. You know, I keep thinking about Martha Stewart, right? When I was growing up, like, Martha Stewart was the thing, right? And she makes a mean plum tart, and I use her plum tart recipe all the time, right? But the standard of Martha Stewart was not the standard I was ever going to live up to, nor was it really aspirational for me. For all the reasons of flux that we just talked about, right, the tradwife social media accounts are very appealing, and this idea of a more traditional lifestyle can be very appealing. Let's again note that it's a privilege to be able to live that kind of lifestyle. It requires both certain financial success to be able to financially be able to do this on one salary, or on a monetized version of, you know, I mean, it doesn't take away from women working as a whole, but that has to be in agreement with a husband who actually is a good guy, right, and respects the woman. And so where I worry is that, you know, at the end of my remarks, I was talking about the fact that we see a political administration right now that is weaponizing fear of the other, weaponizing fear of gender and sex, and constraining it in particular ways. And where, you know, a lot of the tradwife commentary is built on sort of this idea of pro-choice. Women should have if they want to be a tradwife, they can be a tradwife, you know, and I agree with that. If they would like to be a tradwife, that's fine. But where it gets difficult for me is if those tradwife values become the law of the land and affect policy and affect my agency. It's not about my feminism, it is about my personhood and my ability to make choices and my ability to have control over my own being, as Cynthia was sort of talking about, right? So there is the very real potential of overturning Griswold versus Connecticut, which is the legalized contraception case. We've already had the elimination of access to safe abortion on a federal level and in many, many states. We have the change and the elimination of marital rape laws in many states across the country. The SAVE Act, which you've heard about maybe, which is a federal initiative to change voting rights access, would constrain the ability of many women to vote if they changed their names after marriage. Even the attacks on higher education and the independence and freedom, academic freedom that we've experienced have been linked to admissions procedures at universities, which goes back to this idea that fewer men are going to universities than women. And so many aspects of the sort of idealized views that we're seeing through Instagram are actually either a result of, or it's kind of a symbiotic kind of relationship, because you see something on and is widely viewed on TikTok or on Instagram, it takes hold with a certain demographic, which is Gen Z, women and men, and we haven't even talked about the role of men in this, right? And we were talking about it before as we were waiting to come on. And it shapes the conversation, and it normalizes some things and shifts the expectations in a way that then manifest in certain things that we thought were sort of settled or taken for granted and that we needed to move forward on in a more advanced way, realizing that full vision of feminism, realizing the structural supports that would enable people to make choices from a position of strength so that all women could have that choice to stay home if they wanted to. So all men could have the choice to be the sole bread earner if they wanted to. We don't have a society that enables most people to do that right now, right? The Ballerina Farms folks, right, have 9 children. She's beautiful, is a former ballet dancer. She studied at Juilliard. And he is the heir to the JetBlue airline fortune.
Well, that's
I would just add, I don't think there's been a time, really, where we've had that luxury of having, I mean, there are certainly times where men and women played more traditional roles in the home and in the workplace, but I think women have been working in a lot of ways that haven't really been documented. I mean, when in more agrarian societies, for example, women work on the farm too. They don't just not contribute to the economic output of the home. So I think it's a fiction to think that we're trying to get to some place where every man can be a breadwinner and every woman can be a stay-at-home wife, because that's never been the case.
No, but there's a problem in not valuing the work of women in the home, too, right? That is actually a really important kind of feminist promise, right?
Well, listen, you got me.
That's
what I do all day, so.
And there's a lot of discussion on the international front around quantifying and really being able to put a dollar amount to the caregiving role that women play in the home, because that leads also to economic value.
Cynthia, I want to address this question, and maybe you can give us your experience. So what does your experience tells you about a young woman? How can they be a girl boss, pursue her career, and a present partner and mother?
Okay, first of all, I think there's a lot of confusion. I feel like men are like, okay, what can I do? What can I not do? Where am I powerful? Where am I too powerful? And women are like, well, it sounds nice to have a protector. It sounds nice to have a provider, but is it real when I'm in survival mode? I think young women, it's like, what is going to create sustainability for you with or without a partner? What is gonna create fulfillment for you with or without a partner? And by the way, if you choose to be a trad wife, then choose a man who's conscious, who's loving, who's caring, who's trustworthy. Listen, in the 50s, there were a lot, those women that were traditional, hey, they were drinking a lot because they could not escape, right? And the men were just cheating and getting other people because they felt like, this, I own this. I own you. I feel like young women today, nobody should own you. And not a political system. Thank you. And not a culture. You know, you have to be asleep to not notice the rhetoric around how women should be, how they should act, how they should show up. And it's all so that there can be power on one part of the culture. But I feel, I've told my children, my grandchildren, you know, do what you have to do to make sure that you are sustaining your rights and your power and your ability to make a difference. I take people on pilgrimages around the world, and I take them to sacred sites. And the history of women throughout history who have been change makers, who have stood up, who have said, I want equality, I want equanimity. I feel like if we want a world that works for everyone, women have to have as powerful voices as the masculine. And oh, wow, how incredible if we can be in partnership.
Mm-hmm. If I can add, and this is another question and also I think a line of interest, what is the role of men here? Mm-hmm. When we talk about choice, we have been talking for so many years about women's choice to, you know, to do whatever they want with their lives, to have ownership of their own body. What's the role of men in this movement? And I will open up to...
Sure, I mean, that's a big question. And I just wanted to provide something, as Cynthia was talking just now, and I think this point's come up a couple times, so I want to respond. I absolutely believe in independence and individual agency, but I also think one thing that's missing from our society in a big way, and not just in male-female relationships, but at large, is mutual trust. And mutual trust allows for a level of interdependence. Being connected to someone, committed to someone in a family can allow for interdependence. It's not just a woman being dependent on a man for income, because that's, you know, that may come to mind first, but many men are dependent on their wives to make their homes the places that they are, and dependent on their wives to help them stay connected socially and mentally healthy. And there's a lot that we do for one another. So while I completely agree that it's good to have the independence and the ability to, you know, if something were to happen to my husband, then I imagine I would go back into the workforce 100%, and I'd be calling my mom and my mother-in-law and saying, come help me, you know, take care of these children more. And thankfully I have those resources in my life. Not everyone has that kind of relationships with their extended family, but I would say what people are able to build together when they can make sacrifices for one another and be interdependent is also valuable, you know. So I just wanted to add that as a caveat to this piece about individual independence, because I do think we live in a society that's become so atomized that everybody's expected to do everything on their own. You know, sometimes I watch Seinfeld. They are always taking each other to the airport for free, just like as friends. Nobody does that anymore because we have Uber, you know. Seriously, nobody does anything for anybody anymore for free, unless, you know, I think in the middle class and in the working class, people still give and take a lot with favors for friends and watch each other's kids. But in the upper middle class, in the upper classes, people don't do things for their friends anymore because you can hire it out, you know, and we hire out a ton of things. And that has created this society where people don't have the same mutual trust for each other that we could have. And I think in a marriage, it's absolutely critical. I have to be able to trust my husband to say, I'm going to give up something big that matters to me for a little time, and you're going to give up something that matters. He's given up a lot too for our family, but we have a family. And so the previous question was, you know, what would you say to a young woman who wants to have a career and wants to have a family? I would say, your career is probably more flexible than your family plans, and I would prioritize having a family in terms of timeline. Your career is not going to have the same kind of window that having a child will have. I think that's something we have to be honest about with young women. But to get to your question about men, I do think men have a big part in this conversation, and unfortunately, I think this is where the dark underbelly of so many of these online movements lives, and that's what I would call the manosphere. Some of you might be familiar with people like Andrew Tate, and this idea, they take to the extreme the idea that not only are men and women different, but they're not equal. They would say that men are more important and that men can treat women in ways that you and I would find totally unacceptable. And that's, I think, a terribly bad influence on a lot of young men. I'd keep it as far away from my sons as possible because I want to raise my sons to have this idea that, yes, they have to respect women, and one day I think they should expect to provide for and protect women. And so I'm trying to raise my sons with that attitude, but I do think there are some red-pilled dark corners of the internet that are having a real influence in the dating world, where we see a mismatch between what some Gen Z women expect and what some Gen Z men expect. And it's making it hard for them to form connections where they can agree on some of the fundamentals of how family life will work. And so that's what I find most disturbing about this. I think if women are choosing, I like tradition and I like to bake bread and I think it'd be great to have a husband I could submit to one day and he could be my primary breadwinner, I got no problem with that. But what I do have a problem with is men who say to their girlfriend, I want you to leave the workforce now so you can get used to it because, my goodness, what's a stay-at-home girlfriend to do? I'm a stay-at-home mother because there's a lot of work to be done taking care of these kids, but I've watched the videos of stay-at-home girlfriends. Has anybody seen this trend? They mostly do skincare all day. They're mostly to be what we would call trophy wives, and that element of it I do find disturbing just because I think that's not a good influence on young men who might get this idea that I can go find a girl like this who's just going to look good for me always and do everything that I say, and that's not real life, guys. I'm sorry, but you're in for a rude awakening if you think that real women are like that.
Can I
ahead.
Jump in? Okay. So hierarchy, from my opinion, is a structure that needs to be dismantled. Mm-hmm. I work with leaders and organizations and government organizations, and the hierarchical way of being does not support people rising to the fullest and the best that they can be. Women were, I wrote a book called I Choose Me, and women were property until the early 1900s. And that enculturation is still going through the system, where we are told to put everything and everyone first, and do not, because if we don't, we're selfish. And then what that means is that women are trying to find out how to be, make people comfortable, how to be loving, how to be kind, how to care. But they don't take care of themselves. A lot of the women that I coach have terrible issues with self-care. Mm-hmm. I had one of my clients call me up. Her daughter is in college, and the girls in the school were terrified because there was this whole thing going on campus with the boys saying, "Your body, my choice." Hmm. And afraid to go out, afraid to take care of themselves. And it's like I think the masculine and the feminine needs to do some really deep self-reflection on we're interconnected, so why aren't we caring for one another? Why does one person or one group have to be higher than the other? I feel that it's on both sides. If women can step up into the fullness of we are, and men can absolutely understand that the partnership with the feminine is an extraordinary thing on this planet and will save our planet and create legacy for our children.
Mm-hmm. So a couple of things, and I will get back to you. So we have a number of questions. They're very good questions. I'm going to read quickly. And then we have 10 minutes left, so I'm going to start with you, Hadar, to choose one of your comments, and then we can have 3 minutes each to close. Mm-hmm. what a rich conversation, right? There's so many avenues, and we can go and spend another hour in each topic. It's yeah. So I have one to say that as a divorced woman, standing up to save myself was much easier because I had my own career, which one of the topics, right? What is the girl boss thing? Seriously. My friends and colleagues nicknamed me the boss, and we talk about it. It's not girl boss. I'm a grown-up woman, which is 100%. Good. And I think, well, a lot of movement, a legitimization of the choices. I guess I want to stay with the comment about how can we make more sense of tradwives' criticism of the modern approach of careers and the monetization of some tradwives' platforms. So I guess that goes to what is this real, and are we taking advantage of that? So why don't we do the 3-4 minutes each? Hadar.
Oh, good. I have no idea if it's real or not. I don't know. And what I do think is that, if women freely choose to live in a trad wife lifestyle, that is their choice to do. My concern is if those choices manifest in taking away my agency to make different choices, and that changes laws and that changes policies, then I have a really big problem with it. Because I'm willing to say, okay, this is pro-choice. Absolutely, you can choose that. But don't get in the way of me choosing something different. And so fundamentally, that's where I come down. The other thing I would say is, what you just said about going to the airport, really struck me for a second because, and I have to think about it a little bit. I always have somebody take me to the airport. I always have somebody pick me up from the airport, whether they like it or not. And I always take people to the airport. And I have, we have 5 families that we're very close to that I raised my kids with. And I'm part of a big community, right? And we support each other in a lot of different ways. And so maybe there's a sense of alienation from community that drives this idea of having this insular trad wife lifestyle that speaks not only to the inconsistencies and the lack of full manifestation of feminist promise, but also to the radical individualism of American culture that also drives the fantasy around the trad wife lifestyle. And to me, that is sad, right? I'm not going to judge trad wives. They can, if they can make their own choices, then they should make their own choices. But to me, it is sad from a society's point of view that is where we are, that people need those kinds of insular supports, because our idea of individualism and community has fallen apart in such a way that it demands this kind of insular, requirement and this kind of a lifestyle. So I was struck by you saying that, but I just keep coming back to the agency question, right? It's not about, if you want to have a career, great. I had my first kid when I was 40, right? I had a very robust career leading into that and coming out of that. And while I was there, and I took care of my kids and baked bread every week. So, and yes, I'm tired, and yes, there are things that I wish were a little bit different, and I wish that there were other kinds of supports, but you know what? I'm pretty happy with the way that it's turned out. It's been fine. So, and the last thing I would say is just, I recognize my privilege in making the choices that I've made. I am grateful to women and men who came before me to enable me to make those choices that I did. Many of you are sitting in the audience today. And I'm also grateful to the women who will come after me and who will iterate on the choices that I made to be able to live the lives that they want to live and that are purpose-driven and meaningful to them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Hadley?
Is that closing
remarks?
Okay. Closing remarks, let's see. Well, first, I feel compelled to make some corrections to the bio that you read earlier, Soledad, because this is germane to this conversation, but I was executive vice president at the Steamboat Institute, and I don't hold that girl boss job anymore. And I was vice president for policy at Independent Women, and now I'm a senior fellow, which means I'm just adjunct, like I have some contract work that I do. But, what you're saying about the unpaid work and how I'm going to create a cover letter and a resume for whatever job I apply for, 5 or 6 years from now, or whatever the timeline may be, is a big question for me.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I think that the culture, and I hope that the world and our culture is moving in a better direction on that. Maybe I'm too optimistic. I mean, in some ways I'm pessimistic because as a conservative, I was thinking what growing conservatism, because I really think the element of the trad wife stuff and the red pill manosphere of the internet, I would not like to identify with that as being conservative. I think it's just, some things are just hateful, and that doesn't mean they're conservative, it just means they're hateful. So I would also, in my closing thoughts, like to caution against making this so much of an ideological conversation, because I do think, although I am pretty conservative in my political leanings, and probably pretty conservative in my lifestyle, I guess, everybody is just an individual, right? And so for example, I send my kids to Denver public schools, and that's not a very conservative or trad thing. Most of the other women at my church do homeschooling or something, and that's not for me, So everybody's going to make a set of choices that are right for them and their families, and it doesn't all have to relate to, am I a Republican or a Democrat? And I think especially when it comes to how we arrange our personal lives and our families, obviously, there are big picture moral framework questions that relate to both of those things, but my hope is that regardless of if Gen Z women want to vote for, candidates on the left or the right, that they can achieve all of the things that they want out of life, that they can receive all the blessings that life has for them, and that we can all work together to try to make that happen. So yes, I think some of this is intentionally clickbait. People want to get as many clicks as possible. And I've seen things on the internet where I'm like, oh, that person's pretending to live as a cat or something. And I think, oh, that's scary and bad for society. But is one person pretending to be a cat really the end of society? I don't know that somebody having 9 kids and living on a big farm is that bad for society. And I don't know that it really reflects so much of a denigration of women as it is ultimately a bigger question, and one that I think we still haven't fully resolved because we all fall in different places on this. But to what degree do sex differences matter? I mean, that's a question for each of us in our personal lives as we arrange our families and relationships. And it's also a question that's relevant to our public policy. Do we want to have, this is a question that we faced for many years, but do we want to have women in combat positions in the military? Do we want to have women as part of the military draft? Do we want to have any sex-based rights or sex-based differences in how the law treats men and women? And those questions are still open, and we'll debate them here and forevermore. But if you believe, like I do, that men and women are equally valued, but not the same, then you're going to come to a different set of conclusions. And I think that's probably where I'll leave it, just because I think that that's ultimately a question for us all to go home and continue to noodle on. But I'd say this, regardless of your political persuasion, when you come home from the hospital with that newborn baby, sex differences will show up. I'm sorry to say it, but if you're a woman, you're married to a man, and you come home with a newborn baby, it's real life, okay? So you can tell people that men and women are all the same. We're going to do 50% of the child care. We're going to do 50% of everything. You can say that, and then people are going to say, who are you going to, am I going to believe you or my own eyes? Because the world is not a perfectly equitable place. It is a place where people are geared towards different roles, and I don't think that it's ultimately a bad thing when people lean into those things, embrace those things, so long as they're doing it consensually, with choice, and I hope in many cases joyfully and happily, and that we have mutual respect for each other. So that's all.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And Cynthia.
I loved the fact, Hadar, that you spoke about community. Because, the internet is an interesting place. And people have, they follow certain tracks and they make decisions. But I want to talk about reality. I'm a baby boomer. And thank you very much. Thank you. I cannot tell you that in this conversation of the trad wife, it's like, what happens when the husband is no longer there? Many baby boomer women are alone. And some want to date, some don't. But the community that supports you, that nurtures you and lifts you is essential. So whatever choice you're making in terms of relationship is powerful and wonderful. But think about what happens in the next decade and the next decade. Are there people, are there communities that support you, that lift you, and that nurture you? Because it isn't just about raising a family or having a marriage. It's really about how do we coexist and how do we support one another. I think that the trad wife thing may be a fad. Like you, I'm not even sure how real it is or how many people are really invested in it. But the real question is, how do we love one another? How do we nurture one another? How do we care for one another? And how do we care for this planet? Because it is what feeds us. Thank you.
But thank you, everyone. Thank you to our panelists for this rich conversation. I'm sure we can stay here for 2 more hours talking about it. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your questions, and I hope you have a rest of your day that is wonderful.